Tom Brady owns the record with 7 Super Bowl rings, while Aaron Rodgers only has 1. But Tom actually called Aaron the greatest passer of the football the league has ever seen, which raises a massive question about how the man the GOAT considers a superior passer ended up with 6 fewer rings. We're going over the difference between being the most talented player on the field and being the greatest of all time. We have to actually start with what he did on the field because we need a full picture on what he actually accomplished before we get to his shortcomings. Aaron Rodgers has a career 102.6 passer rating, which stands as the highest mark for any quarterback in NFL history with a real sample size tied with Lamar Jackson. Brady finished his career at 97.2, and while both of those numbers are elite, Rodgers leads by more than 5 full points. In a game where the difference between a good year and a legendary one is just 2 or 3 points, that 5-point lead is a total blowout. Passer rating isn't a perfect stat though, but the thing is, every single efficiency metric we have tells the exact same story. Rodgers beats Brady in completion percentage, he beats him in yards per attempt, and he absolutely destroys him in touchdown to interception ratio. Over the course of his career so far, Rodgers has put up 527 touchdowns against only 123 interceptions, creating a level of ball security that no one in league history has ever matched at that volume. Brady threw more scores with 649, but he also threw 212 interceptions, meaning Rodgers played a much cleaner game overall. The eye test backs up these numbers every single time you watch them play. The throws Rodgers made looked like routine passes were actually impossible for almost anyone else, like when he would roll to his left and fire a strike back across his body while completely off balance. Most quarterbacks can't even try those throws without turning the ball over, yet Rodgers was hitting them in fourth quarters and high-stake games. Brady built his legend on timing, precision, and a genius-level ability to read the field, but his physical ceiling was just lower. And that isn't a shot at Brady, it's just the reality of their natural gifts. Shannon Sharpe played this game at the highest level, and he put it as clearly as anyone about 5 years ago when he was still on Undisputed. He noted that Rodgers can make every throw Brady can, but there are throws that Rodgers pulls off that Brady can only dream of. And that's the standard of arm talent we're dealing with here. The MVP voters saw it the same way, which is why Aaron walked away with 4 MVP awards for his performances in 2011, 14, 20, and 21. Only Peyton Manning has more with 5. Brady earned 3 MVPs of his own, and he was obviously extraordinary. But the gap in raw passing ability was something even the experts couldn't ignore. If you took both of these guys at their absolute peaks and asked every defensive coordinator in the league which one they'd hate to face in their prime, most would pick Rodgers. His arm talent and ability to improvise created something out of nothing when a play broke down and put him at a level Brady never reached. But this is where the story gets messy because the GOAT conversation isn't just about how pretty you throw the ball. It's about what you do when the season's on the line and whether you can win when it matters the most across different teams and situations. The moment you change the criteria to winning, the entire argument flips, especially when you realize multiple of those MVP seasons for Rodgers ended the exact same way. And with that said, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to our sponsor, Kalshi, for today's video. Since we're talking about Aaron Rodgers, I had to check out what the market would be for Aaron to retire before the 2026 NFL season started. Kalshi is the largest legal prediction market in the US with over 1 million users currently. Right now, you can trade on whether you think Aaron will retire before the start of the next season. The contract is currently sitting at 35 cents, meaning the market thinks that there's a 35% chance this actually happens. If you trade 35 cents and you're right, you get $1 per contract. What's really cool about Kalshi is that it's peer-to-peer trading. No sportsbook tilting odds against you or limiting your trades when you start winning. Plus, it's available in all 50 states. If you want to try it out, Kalshi is giving away $20 to anybody who uses my link down below and also trades $20. Thanks again to Kalshi for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to it. The 2011 season stands as one of the most efficient quarterback seasons ever in the history of the NFL, only really rivaled by maybe Lamar Jackson's 2024 season. When you look at the stat line of 45 touchdowns against only 6 interceptions with a 122.5 passer rating, it feels like someone playing a video game on the easiest setting. The Packers finished that year 15-1, but the numbers only tell half the story because watching Rodgers live that season was a completely different experience. He was operating at a level that made the rest of the league look like they were playing a completely different sport, and defensive coordinators simply had no answers for what he was doing. Coverage didn't matter and pressure didn't matter because he would routinely extend the play, reset his feet on the sideline, and then throw a 40-yard strike while falling out of bounds. The MVP vote reflected the dominance when Rodgers was only 2 votes shy of being unanimous. It was actually Peyton Manning, a 4-time MVP himself at that time, who handed Rodgers the award that night on stage. That moment carried a lot of weight because Manning understood what it took to reach the pinnacle of the position, and he was standing there honoring a guy who had just reached a height even he had never touched. yet. Everyone assumed the Packers were the next great dynasty since they were coming off a Super Bowl win and had the best quarterback on earth playing the best football of his life. Green Bay looked like a team that would dominate the next decade of NFL history, but then the Giants walked into Lambeau Field during the divisional round and knocked them out. That loss planted the first seed of a frustrating pattern where regular season dominance would eventually hit a playoff wall. Back in 2011, it still felt like a fluke or a minor blip on the radar, and most fans believed the dynasty was still around the corner. Fast forward 9 years and Rodgers managed to do the exact same thing again, even though he was 37 years old and plenty of people were wondering if his best days were behind him. During that 2020 season, he put up 48 touchdowns with only 5 interceptions while posting a career high completion percentage of 70.7%. Green Bay finished 13-3 and he walked away with another MVP award after taking 39 of the 50 votes. Tom Brady actually took 10 of those votes during his first year in Tampa, which is a detail we need to remember for later. The reality is that Rodgers was 37 and still producing numbers that most quarterbacks can't even touch when they're in their absolute physical prime of their careers. We're looking at 2 separate MVP seasons that both rank as the most efficient years ever played by a quarterback. The fact that the same guy produced both of them nearly a decade apart is something the league had never really seen before. You have to hold on to one specific detail about these 2 seasons because it explains everything that happens next in his career. The problem is that both of these legendary runs ended the exact same disappointing way. In 2011, the Packers lost their home playoff game in the divisional round, and in 2020, they fell in the NFC Championship game right there at Lambeau Field. You have 2 historically great regular seasons that both resulted in upsetting playoff exits, both as favorites. That 2020 loss stings more than most because of who was standing on the other side and what the result did to the legacy conversation. But before we get into that specific heartbreak, we have to talk about the game that still hurts the most for the Green Bay faithful. This was the year Rodgers had just won another MVP and had the Packers leading late in the 4th quarter on the road against the best defense of their generation. The Super Bowl was right there for the taking before it completely slipped away. The 2014 NFC Championship is a game that defines the gap between pure talent and ultimate greatness more than any other moment in his career. The 2014 season was a masterclass from start up until the finish. Rodgers put up 38 touchdowns against only 5 interceptions, finishing with a 112.2 passer rating that secured his 2nd MVP award. Green Bay cruised to a 12-4 record, and by the time January rolled around, it really felt like their year. The roster was healthy, the offense was clicking, and Rodgers was playing some of the most efficient football we've ever seen. Then they went to Seattle for the NFC Championship game. You're talking about the loudest stadium in the league against the defending champions and the best defense in football. Despite the noise, Green Bay walked into that environment and went up 16-0 by halftime. It's a massive lead in a game of magnitude, especially considering they had the Seattle Seahawks completely shut down on their own turf. Even with Rodgers not playing his absolute sharpest, the Packers held a 19-7 lead when the 4th quarter started. They were 12 minutes away from a Super Bowl trip, but what followed was one of the most painful collapses in the history of the NFL playoffs. Seattle stormed back with 15 unanswered points in the final minutes of regulation, using 2 touchdowns and a wild 2-point conversion, eventually taking the lead and forcing Rodgers to have to drag them back into field goal range in order to force overtime. Jermaine Kearse eventually caught the game-winning touchdown in OT, sending Seattle to the Super Bowl while Green Bay headed home in shock. There are plenty of reasons why the Packers lost that game: conservativeness and the obvious non-recovery on the onside kick. But the reality is, Rodgers finished that day 19-34 with 178 yards, 1 TD, and 2 interceptions for a 55.8 passer rating. The honest truth is that when the Packers needed their best guy to shut the door, he just didn't do it. While the coaching staff and the supporting cast definitely failed him, Rodgers didn't play his best football when Seattle turned it into a real fight. This is exactly where the story connects back to Tom Brady. Just 2 weeks later, the New England Patriots beat those same Seahawks 28-24 in the Super Bowl. That gave us the Malcolm Butler interception on the goal line and a signature Brady comeback from 10 points down in the 4th quarter. Brady won that game against the exact same defense that had just sent Rodgers packing. If the Packers hold that lead or if Bostic just falls on the onside kick, Green Bay goes to the Super Bowl to face the Patriots. We would have seen peak Rodgers against peak Brady on the biggest stage in sports at the exact moment both guys were at the height of their powers. It would have been like that LeBron versus Kobe finals we never got to see. It was a matchup the sport deserved but never actually got. A Brady versus Rodgers Super Bowl would have settled the GOAT debate on the field where it belongs. Instead, Green Bay blew the lead, Brady beat Seattle, and the greatest head-to-head matchup in history stayed a theoretical debate instead of a game. We're not talking about just one bad playoff run or a single unlucky bounce of the ball. This is a pattern that played out over an entire decade, and it's the single biggest reason why the GOAT conversation usually starts and ends with Tom Brady. The reality is that Rodgers went 1-4 in NFC Championship games throughout his career. His only win came back in January of 2011 when Green Bay beat Chicago on their way to a Super Bowl title. But after that, he made 4 more trips to the conference title game and lost every single one. He fell to Seattle in 2014, Atlanta in 2016, San Francisco in 2019, and finally Tampa in 2020. That's 4 separate chances to reach the Super Bowl with arguably the most talented quarterback to ever live, and all 4 times the Packers went home. Now, before we dig into the numbers, the fair thing to say is that Rodgers didn't lose these games by himself. The Green Bay defense gave up 30 or more points in several of those matchups, and the coaching staff certainly did not always have the best game plans ready to go. Football is a team sport, and Rodgers was carrying more than his fair share of the weight during most of those seasons. But this is where it gets uncomfortable because the numbers for those 5 NFC Championship games tells a story that's very hard to explain away. Across those 5 starts, Rodgers averaged a passer rating of 83.7 while throwing 9 touchdowns against 8 interceptions. In those 4 losses specifically, there were long stretches where he simply didn't take over the game the way the best quarterback alive is expected to do. The version of Rodgers who went 19 for 34 for 178 yards with 2 interceptions against Seattle in 2014 was not the same guy who threw for 45 touchdowns and only 6 interceptions in the regular season that year. While he threw for 287 yards and 3 touchdowns against Atlanta in 2016, the Packers still found themselves in a massive hole that he couldn't dig themselves out of in time. When you look at Brady in those same kind of games and high-stake moments, it's a completely different story, and we'll get to that in a minute. The matchup that probably haunts the legacy of Rodgers more than any other is the San Francisco 49ers. He's 0-4 against the Niners in the playoffs, which means he has 0 wins and 4 losses against the one team and one scheme he could never seem to solve. In those 4 games, his stats look fine on paper, but Green Bay never actually won the game. At a certain point, having a high completion percentage doesn't mean much when you keep losing to the same opponent every January. What makes this wall even harder to accept is that the talent was never the issue. In almost all of these playoff runs, Rodgers was still making throws that nobody else in the league could even dream of making. The problem was never his arm or his physical ability, but rather the final result or the scoreboard. In the GOAT conversation, results are the only thing that truly matters. Brady went 9-4 in conference championship games over his career, while Rodgers went 1-4. That's not a small gap between 2 greats. It's really just funny by comparison. The thing is, Rodgers knew exactly what was at stake every time he stepped onto the field. He wasn't losing these games because he didn't care or because he wasn't prepared for the moment. He was losing them because the margin between winning and losing at that elite level is razor thin, and for over a decade that margin kept coming up just short for the Packers. 1 ring, 4 MVPs, and 4 NFC Championship losses is the career summary in its most brutal and honest form. When you look at the full rivalry between these two, Brady and Rodgers met 5 times between the playoffs and the regular season. While Brady won 3 of those, Rodgers only won 2. The rivalry kicked off in December of 2014 when Rodgers led his Packers to a 26-21 victory over Brady's Patriots. For the fans in Wisconsin, that win served as definitive proof that their quarterback could look the best in the world in the eye and come out on top. It took a few years, but Tom eventually found his answer in 2018 when the Patriots traveled to Lambeau for a Sunday Night Football showdown. New England's offense moved the ball whenever they wanted during that 31-17 win, and the Green Bay offense never found a consistent rhythm. When Brady moved to Tampa Bay, the entire dynamic of this rivalry shifted. During Week 6 of 2020, the Buccaneers hosted the Packers in a game that turned into an absolute blowout. Brady picked the Green Bay secondary apart for 3 touchdowns, while Rodgers struggled through a day featuring only 160 passing yards and 2 costly interceptions. The real defining moment of this rivalry arrived on January 24th of 2021 for the NFC Championship game at Lambeau Field. Rodgers was coming off his 3rd MVP award, and the Packers held the top seed in the conference, making them the favorites to reach the Super Bowl. Brady was 43 years old and playing his first season in Tampa, yet he was still finding ways to ruin everyone else's plans. Tampa won that game 31-26, but the box score tells a very confusing story about who played better. Aaron actually finished with the superior stat line because he threw for 346 yards and 3 touchdowns with only 1 pick. Brady struggled at times by throwing 3 interceptions to go along with 280 yards, which means Rodgers was technically the more efficient passer on the field that day. The problem for Green Bay was that Brady's offense built a massive lead early and controlled the tempo exactly when the game was hanging in the balance. The Packers failed repeatedly to punch the ball into the end zone and settle for field goals in the red zone, which allowed the clock to become Brady's biggest ally. In the moments that mattered the most, specifically in the playoffs with the trip to the Super Bowl on the line, Brady was the one celebrating. And Aaron put up great individual numbers in that championship game, but those stats didn't produce the win the team desperately needed. The comparison between these two doesn't just stop at their head-to-head record on the field. What happened between both of them after they moved on from their original franchises might be the most telling part of this entire debate. When Brady left New England in 2020 after 2 decades of dominance, he joined the Tampa Bay team that had been irrelevant for a long time. Despite being 43 years old and dealing with a new city and a new coaching staff, he won a Super Bowl in his very first season. It didn't matter that everything around him had changed because Brady walked into that building and immediately replicated the winning culture he had spent 20 years building. Rodgers followed a similar path by leaving Green Bay in 2023 after 18 seasons to join the New York Jets. There were massive Super Bowl expectations surrounding that move, but his season ended after just 4 snaps when he tore his Achilles. The contrast between Brady winning a ring and Rodgers staring from the sidelines is already jarring, but the following season made the comparison even tougher to swallow. Aaron returned healthy and motivated for the 2024 season, but the Jets collapsed to a 5-12 record while he didn't look the same. The offense never found its footing and the roster crumbled around him, leaving New York out of the playoff hunt before the holidays even arrived. He would then go on to the Steelers the following year, and while he was fine this past season, it was another disappointing playoff loss. While Brady's final act in the NFL was hoisting a Lombardi trophy, the closing chapters for Aaron have been defined by injuries and early exits from the postseason. So here's where we land on this debate finally. Aaron Rodgers is the greatest pure passer to ever step foot on the NFL field. The thing is, the GOAT conversation is actually about sustained winning at the highest level. You have to deliver when the game is on the line for different rosters and different schemes for 2 straight decades. That's where Brady pulls away with 7 rings and 35 playoff wins, including a Super Bowl title at age 43 with a brand new team. Both of these things can be true at the same time without taking one away from the other. The most talented quarterback who ever lived only has 1 ring, while the GOAT has 7, and that really tells the whole story. So there you have it. Thanks for watching, and subscribe if you're new.